Marshall,
Hmm?
why does this script say it was written by Sazz Pataki?
Now, I'm not saying I told you so, but I've been on the Marshall, or should I say Rex is the killer train since the very beginning of the season, but I believe there's more to the story, so make sure to stick around to the end of this video to hear yet another one of my wild theories. As we've got a murder to solve, as I'll be breaking down this 4th season of Only Murders in the Building, episode 9, spoilers ahead. 2 years ago, we cut to Sazz alive and well getting the call for the new Ron Howard project. Now, filled with excitement about this project, she doesn't pay attention and accidentally hits a mysterious person with her car. Now, when they get hit by the car, it looks like they lose a bunch of pages to a script, as we see that she's very impressed by their flip and asks if they've ever stunned it before. Now, based on my theories I've shared with you all for the last few weeks, I immediately knew that this was Marshall, aka Rex. Now, this week's episode title marks the first time this season that we don't get a title that's based on an actual movie, but instead, this week's title is based on the Ron Howard movie that he's making in this very episode. Now, as we cut to the trio, we see that they're trying to visit Glenn in the hospital with beers and corned beef hash and other stereotypical Irish things, but they end up getting denied by the nurse, who says that she'll call them if he awakes. Now, in comes the bartender from Concussion, who arrives and gives them some insight about thinking that Glenn was the protege, as he lets them know that Glenn was actually the replacement of the protege because that previous stuntman was bad and was blackballed. Now, to the trio, this sounds like the perfect motivation to kill both of these characters, but the question remains, who is this protege and what about this project? Well, according to the bartender, the only people that know is Sazz, Glenn, the protege, and the director, who happens to be the one and only Ron Howard, or as Oliver puts it, the only true celebrity of this season. Now, before moving on, let's have a little sidebar here. What's the deal with the bartender? Now, he's clearly not a fan of the trio and hates their podcast. Now, we know the show is known for random characters popping up every now and then, but there's something off about him, and the fact that he doesn't like them just makes me wonder if he's the one who wrote the note for the trio to end their podcast way back in season 1. Now, I'm not saying that he's this season's killer, but let me know if you all have some suspicions about the bartender and if he goes back to the very beginning. Now, back to the flashback sequences, we see Sazz giving the protege some tips and tricks for their scene, which will have them being lit on fire. Now, it's establishing these scenes that they've spent a lot of time together in preparation for their first shoot, which makes me believe that we'll get the mysterious person's backstory by the finale to show their relationship more in depth. Now, again, the flashbacks were playing up the mystery of who this person is by not having them speak or not showing their face. But again, I think it was pretty obvious, especially with my last video I shared with you all last week. Now, sticking with those particular scenes, throughout the episode, we see more words of encouragement from Sazz, and later on, we see something terrible happen to this mystery person on set after going through with the fire stunt, which we'll be following up with that later on in this breakdown. Now, back with the trio, they need to figure out how they're going to get a hold of Howard, as Oliver reveals that they're really close friends, or at least in Oliver's eyes. As Oliver recalls the story about how they first met in the 80s to this wild night of partying and drinking, but of course, you know you can't fully trust the Oliver Putnam story. Now, Mabel's off to Bev's office to get Howard's contact information. Meanwhile, Charles volunteers to getting Oliver's bachelor party set up. Now, with Bev, we see Mabel gets an earful of her shenanigans, but she does get the address to where Howard is filming his new movie, which happens to be in New York. Now, in this scene, it is implied that each new draft of the movie script has gotten worse and worse by Marshall, which, going back to my theory of him being the killer or at least having some involvement, I've always said that I feel like he's playing this role, and hearing that this script is bad makes me think that he didn't write the original script and he stole it, and again, pretending to be a writer, and it's pretty much implied by the end of this episode that it does appear that he stole this script from Sazz. Now, the trio managed to get on set under the identities of their background actors, which requires them to stand out in a lineup of other actors first before getting on set and showing their best screams. As we see, Oliver gets in, Charles gets in because they recognize him from Brazos, and Mabel gets in based on her face card. Now, back at the hospital, we see Glenn finally wakes up, as the nurse updates him on the trio wanting to ask him some questions, and he's got exactly the information that they need. Now, we see what unfortunately happens to Glenn later on in this episode, but my question is, when it's revealed that he knew or at least recognized Rex with the beard, why didn't he mention what happened or fill the trio in before he got shot? Like, literally in that moment when he was dropping off the cake to Charles' house, or why didn't he mention anything during the photo shoot? And again, we know what happens to Glenn later on, but I'm wondering if there's still more to his his story and what truths did he know? Now back on set, now in costumes, Mabel has to leave because she learns that Glenn is awake, leaving Oliver and Charles to getting to Ron Howard, but they end up having a little bit of a fight after Charles offers some terrible ideas for his bachelor party. Now they eventually make it to the set, but they get into another argument, but this time it's in front of the film crew and they end up getting fired before meeting Ron Howard. Now before Mabel makes it to the hospital, we see our mysterious killer kills again and finishes off Glenn by smothering him in the hospital bed. Now let's go ahead and put an RIP in the comments now and saying goodbye to Paul Rudd again.
How do I say goodbye?
So hard to say goodbye to yesterday.
In the series, which makes me wonder if they're going to recast him for a third time in season 5. Now this next moment's pretty interesting because we see Mabel arrives to the hospital and she learns the bad news, but in the background this scene we see that there's breaking news on the television about some dry cleaning owner who's gone missing and that there is a crime family involved. Mabel learns that before the nurse called her that she called Glenn's emergency contact and that was Sazz. And a man answered the phone, as we know that the killer had Sazz's phone. But to backtrack, am I totally missing or forgetting the importance of this dry cleaning situation? Is this a callback to a previous season? Is this an inside joke or a reference to a film or a show? Or is this a little sneak peek into a plot for season 5, a missing persons case? I wonder if this missing person will end up being played by Paul Rudd if it is indeed setting up season 5 and we might see him in some type of prosthetics. Also wonder if Jan's involved in this missing persons case. Hell, we might learn more about this in next week's finale. But again, let me know in the comments if this was some reference to some previous plot from previous seasons. Now after their bro fight, we see Charles admits to being a little bit jealous of Oliver getting married and he was hoping that they grow old together, as Oliver tells him,
"You know we're going to be friends till the end."
Not gonna lie, this was a really nice moment between these two friends. This leads to them going to lunch and Oliver telling Charles that he wants to be friends with him to the end of time, and they make up and Oliver asks Charles for him to be his best man at the wedding. And he also will make him the emergency contact just in case he falls in the future. Which, by the way, this makes me think of the plot that they set up in last season with Oliver having a bad heart. I wonder if that's gonna be brought up in the finale next week or if they're gonna even bring that up in season 5. But I do want to go back to Charles and Oliver talking and Oliver saying that they will be friends to the end. Now, I've been saying this since the end of season 2 that this show has been setting up Charles to die. Again, we know the health scares from Oliver and we have Mabel at the end of this episode potentially being in the room with the killer. But they've been hinting at the death of Charles for a while now, and I'm gonna throw this out there. What if we see Charles die next week in the finale, or at the very least it's implied that he's badly hurt in next week's episode? Now after showing the back of his head for this entire episode, we finally meet Ron as he appears to the restaurant, and it also appears that Oliver's story was true, that they was boys back in the day. Now we end this penultimate episode with Marshall outside of Mabel's apartment trying to get some help on the rewrites. Now while that's all happening, we go back to the restaurant with Ron as he tells Charles and Oliver what actually happened to the stuntman on the set during those flashback sequences. As we see the stuntman walking over to Ron trying to show him some pages to his script, and while this is happening he didn't realize that he was still on fire, which ended up costing Ron to lose his eyebrows, which ultimately led to him getting fired and blacklisted. Now within this conversation at the restaurant, we also learned that Ron's on-set special shoes were stolen, the same shoes that matched the prints of earlier in this season on the radiator. Find out that this mysterious stuntman went under the name of Rex Bailey, and we see a picture of him and it's the one and only Marshall, or should I just call him Rex? Now back with Mabel and Marshall, she grabs a beer and finds the script for the Only Murders in the Building movie, and the original writer is listed as Sazz. Now Mabel confronts him about finding this, and she gets a text message from the guys warning her about Rex, and we see that he reads it first. Obviously now she's not knowing that she's in the room with the killer. Now let's just jump right into the ending and break that down. Now for weeks, literally since episode 1, I've had my suspicions about Marshall, aka Rex, but honestly, I feel like this is too easy. I feel like there's definitely more to this story. Now it appears that Rex only agreed to be a stuntman to get on set to have someone read his script for whatever movie or whatever project he was trying to get greenlit. But hear me out. I've been saying that Marshall is just simply playing to act as a writer and actually hiding his true identity, but again, this role requires him to change his hair and his glasses and his beard. Was it me, or was he acting completely different from the timid, somewhat scared version of of Marshall that we've seen this whole season. Again, I know he's playing a role, but if we go back to the flashback sequences, Rex came off more relaxed and had a very different vibe, similar to like a surfer bro. Now, before I say what I'm about to say now, I do think ultimately Rex and Marshall will be revealed to be the same person, just for the sake of having a wild theory for the finale. It will never shake the twins theory from season 3, and if you know, you know. But what if Rex isn't Marshall, but they're actually two separate people? Which in return would give us a shooter and a person to move the body into the incinerator. What if Rex and Marshall always had dreams of getting into movies and going into Hollywood, and one of them finally got their big break? But as we saw the situation playing out with Ron and them getting banned from making movies and being on set ruined their career. Leaving one of the brothers, let's assume that it's Marshall, wanting revenge for his younger brother, or again his twin brother, which in return led to the death of Sazz. I know it's a lot to consider, but I just have this feeling that there's gonna be a lot more involved with the whole Marshall Rex situation than meets the eye. And to add more fuel to the fire, pun intended, we see Marshall or Rex killing Glenn, but they don't have the beard on. Now, of course, they don't have it on because they don't want to get caught or noticed. But again, what if this is the other brother that's the killer and the other one's just a cleanup guy? Now, to address the Mabel script reveal at the end of this episode, was this the sensitive conversation Sazz wanted to have with Charles at the end of season 3? She was going to tell him that she wrote a movie without his knowledge or his consent, and she was on the verge of selling the script to Bev, but wanted to first have him read it to get his ideas and see how he felt about it. And in doing so, obviously Charles would have known that the original writer wasn't Rex or Marshall, making him a fraud or at least a thief. Now, to expand upon this script situation, what if Sazz felt bad for Marshall/Rex and wanted to give them a second chance and make it into Hollywood? What if she promised to get an executive to read the script over, but playing devil's advocate, rest in peace to Sazz, we all love her, but what if she portrayed Marshall/Rex? What if she put her name on the script and took credit for the movie, leading to her death or stealing the idea from Marshall/Rex? I know I'm just throwing stuff at the wall at this point, but I do feel like there will be a bigger reveal with Sazz and Marshall and Rex, and there's going to be a lot more to that story. Now, after this episode, here are some questions that come to mind, and I hope they get answered in the finale, and they're in no particular order. I'm just so interested to learn more about this friendship or relationship between Sazz and Rex or Marshall. Was her having him become a stuntman her way of saying sorry for hitting you with my car and please don't sue me? Like, how close were they? How much time they spent together? Are we under the impression that Rex blamed her for getting him banned for those 2 years and he had a grudge over those 2 years and ultimately set up to kill her? And forget about the gun that Detective Williams had, the one that she took from the trio after they got it from Bev, who was waving it at him back at the Paradise. Going back to episode 1 of the season, who was that person that was in Sazz's apartment? Was that Marshall or Rex looking for the original script? Now again, RIP to Glenn, but what was the whole situation with the rats? Again, I had theorized that he was, like, metaphorically speaking, that there's a rat amongst the community of stuntman, but is there more to that story? Will that have a payoff? Now, going back to the phone call and voicemail that Sazz left on Bev's phone, was that conversation she was going to have about her script being stolen and that Marshall's a fraud? Now, of course, we know next week's going to be the wedding, and I would assume we're going to probably get some return characters from the past. Some that come to mind is, where the hell has Oliver's son been? Now, we'll most likely get some cameos from celebrities. What about some of Mabel's exes? Also, what about the bride, Loretta? Will she bring her castmate to the wedding? What about her son, Dickie? Which, speaking of appearances, what if Jan makes a special cameo or pops up last minute and explains where she's been this whole time? Which, speaking of Jan and speaking of season 1, who wrote the warning notes to the trio back in season 1? It can't be Rex. I don't think that's the same person, so who was this mystery person? And last but not least, what's the deal with this whole situation with this person that's missing that owns the dry cleaner? Now, as far as my review of this episode go and just my overall thoughts, for this being a penultimate episode, I thought it was okay at best. Now, taking away my Marshall is the killer theory and just looking at the structure of this episode, starting from the framing of the flashbacks, they just kind of felt out of place and very generic to me. Now, again, we lost a character in this episode, rest in peace to Glenn. And yes, Paul Rudd is great, I love seeing him in anything, but I wasn't the biggest Glenn fan and I really didn't care too much for the character, so when it came to the death scene, it was just kind of underwhelming for me. Comparing his death to Dudenoff last week, it's almost night and day. Like, I cared way more about that emotional depth than I did about Glenn dying. And then when we look at what the trio was doing this episode, and Ron, the bachelor party plots, they all just kind of felt a little out of place as well, and the pacing and just the overall satisfaction just wasn't there for me. Now, of course, I like the reveal at the end. I love the stuff between Charles and Oliver sharing their emotions for one another. But again, this is the second to last episode of this season, and it didn't have the punch to the gut type of drama or anything shocking that really sets up the finale in my personal opinion. Which, speaking of the finale next week in the episode, which is titled My Best Friend's Wedding, the synopsis reads, final answers are revealed, but not before the trio faces moral danger at the Arconia wedding. I've stated in the past that I feel like we're going to have a cliffhanger in next week's finale, so I'm preparing myself for that mentally, and I hope you all do the same. When it comes to the wedding, what's going to happen? Like, I feel like something, again, this cliffhanger will be something pretty tragic. Like, what if one of our trio members get hurt, or what if, even worse, one of them gets killed? I'm looking at you, Charles. But seriously, I don't think we're going to get all of our questions answered, especially when it pertains to who's the person that's been watching them from the very beginning of the show, and also that whole little bit of that missing person on the news might be setting up season 5 as well. Now, that's going to be the end of this week's breakdown of Only Murders in the Building. It is now your turn to go in the comments and let me know all your thoughts about this episode. What did you like, love, or hate? What worked? What didn't work? What did you think about all the little Easter eggs or deeper meanings? What are your major theories? What are the questions you all hope to get in next week's finale? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. Now, of course, if you all are still here at this point in the video, I can't thank you enough for the support. I love talking about the show with you all, and I thank you so much. So if you are still here, put in the comments right now, #RexBailey. I'll be back to discuss episode 10 with you all next week, but before we wrap up, if you all appreciate these breakdowns, make sure you hit that like button. Also, hit the share button. Share this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show. And if you have been here since the very beginning, and if you've been watching these videos and having a good time, but you haven't subscribed, do your boy a favor and consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification. You all are amazing, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.